I'm Jo Ingold. I'm a lecturer in Human Resource Management and Public Policy, and I'm going to be talking about my research about employee engagement in employability and skills programmes in the UK and Denmark. So basically they're programmes that are thought up by governments in order to help people who are not in work back into employment, but they tend to be delivered by different organisations. And I wanted to know, do businesses engage in these programmes? What do they think about these programmes? And it's a really underexplored area. Quite astonishingly, although these programmes have been around since the 1990s and have been quite popular in quite a lot of countries, research has tended to look at the experience of people going through the programmes, which is obviously important, but has not really looked at the employer's role in it, which is really critical, because obviously if we're trying to get people into work, then we're looking, or the government is looking for employers to give people opportunities, work placements or jobs, but ideally jobs. So looking at the employer's angle on it and their perspectives is really quite critical to knowing whether they're successful and whether they're going in the right direction. Although in the survey and in the interviews with employers, we found that they were quite positive about employing people who've been unemployed or out of the labour market for a while for whatever reason. We also found that employers were really sceptical about programmes and almost felt that people going through the programmes were kind of being tarnished, really. And one of the problems with this was that employers were receiving a lot of applications for jobs, particularly in the UK, receiving a lot of applications for jobs that were quite unfiltered, so people who didn't seem appropriate, and they were receiving quite large numbers of these. So for this, employers were really frustrated about this because it cost them in time and other resource to deal with these applications. So that meant that, to an extent, although even if we make programmes attractive for employers and make them easier for employers to engage in, we've got to be really mindful of what we're asking employers to do, and that something like this can really undermine programmes. In the UK, we saw that, yes, employers were involved and to an extent engaged in various programmes, but they weren't as engaged at a kind of deeper level, weren't as committed as employers in Denmark. And this is quite worrying because although there were some good bits to the story, it's just not enough. We can do a lot better, really. We see some really basic problems, like employers just don't know about programmes. There are too many programmes, they're too complex, they're focused on just a very kind of bureaucratic policy angle in a sense, so they're not really seen through, when they're designed, it would seem, they're not seen through employers' eyes. How would an employer view this? What would employers think is the value of engaging in these programmes? They have a potential of offering quite a lot, diversifying workforces, giving employers another recruitment channel, and actually offering them a great talent pool of people who they might not otherwise ever come across because they're quite disadvantaged in the labour market. But at the moment, employers are not really seeing the value. That's not been explained to them, and it's just quite difficult for them to find information and understand what the programme can offer them, how they can get involved. So that's quite a basic shortcoming that I think could be fixed fairly easily by governments. In Denmark, employers knew a lot about the programmes. They found them quite easy to engage with and were relatively committed, especially compared to the UK. In Denmark, in the UK, there was a lot weaker trust, if you like, in government policy. Employers were quite sceptical of policies, particularly policies that they saw as changing quite a lot. They were just quite suspicious, really. And it meant that because in the UK our institutional context of employers, trade unions, government, there's not really that partnership like there is in Denmark. So there was quite a weak basis to start with, and that meant that relationships between employers and people delivering these programmes on the ground were really critical. In Denmark, they kind of added to what was already there, but in the UK, they were really critical to what was going on, and it was almost like these organisations on the ground are having to really fill in the gaps for the sort of lack of institutional structures.